So, a very common question for learning any language, even something that's relatively simple for native English speakers like French or Spanish, is you're starting out and you're overwhelmed by the size of the task. You're just beginning. Maybe you've got a couple of books, but it just seems such a huge task ahead, and progress is difficult to quantify, difficult to feel a sense of progress. I know that learning something like Chinese, it's likely that people are going to find a very similar emotion coming up. So, what would you say to someone who is starting out with Chinese but just feels that it's a huge task and they're kind of feeling a little bit overwhelmed?
Sure. I think part of it is a question of psychology, and I think part of it is just a practical question of how you're studying. So on the psychology side of things, it's really important that you hyper-focus down, you ratchet down to just a few things at a time. Now, whether that's 3 Chinese characters, or maybe it's one verb, or one idiom, or one phrase, and you focus all your energy on just that one thing at a time. Ignore everything else. This actually was really well, I think, codified. It was a Will Smith quote. He was in an interview with Charlie Rose.
He's got some great quotes, Will Smith.
Great quotes. Yeah. And he was recounting a story from his childhood when his dad told him and his brother one day that, okay, you need to build a brick wall right here, an entire brick wall. And, they were like, oh, my dad, that's going to take forever, It's too big of a task. And he's like, just do it. Pick up one brick, and you lay that brick as perfectly as you can. And all you think about is that one brick. That's it. Lay that brick perfectly. And then you pick up another. And you lay that brick. That's all you see is that one brick, and you lay that as perfectly as you can.
So apply
before you know it, yep, sorry.
Apply that metaphor to language, to learning Chinese then.
Yeah.
How does it translate?
So with Chinese characters, I think perfect example. That's one of the most intimidating elements of the language, as we discussed, to a lot of new learners or even old hats. So don't think, I have to learn 3,000 Chinese characters. It's going to take a lifetime. No. Right now, I need to learn this one. That's it. This character.
And focus on learning it properly.
Yeah. Just nail it. And I think part of that even is in the early days when you're really motivated, you're probably going to bite off a bit much. You're going to think, I'm going to learn 50 Chinese characters a day. Yeah, good luck with that. You pretty soon you're going to be forgetting a lot more than you remember. But if you pick, let's say, 10 or 20, depending on how you go about it, or even 5 or even 1.
Well, yeah, if that's what it takes to make it happen, then 1 is a great start.
Ratchet it down to 1. And then that dovetails into the other component, which is the practical nuts and bits part of, actually how you learn each day and how you measure your learning. If you do ratchet it down to 1 character and you count, okay, today I learned 5 characters. That's a number. That's, Peter Drucker's what measures gets managed. That's it. You know exactly how much you did. Whereas if you're just kind of throwing all the stuff at you all the time, it's really hard, as you said, to really measure your progress or gauge what you've done.
Okay. So carrying on this overwhelm thing for a minute, let's think about speaking, because that's what a lot of people want to do above all is, to be able to speak. I remember feeling this quite recently with Cantonese, where I'd be talking to someone and there's just so much I don't know and so much I can't say. What's the next step? How do you move forward from that point?
I think part of it is not being quite so hard on oneself and realizing you already know quite a bit and you've come a certain gap. You've come a certain distance. You do know the word for X, Y, Z already. And remind yourself, this morning I didn't know the word for this. Now I do. Celebrate your small wins and don't be quite so hard on oneself.
So it's the psychology aspect.
Again, yeah, it's hard to talk about without sounding kind of wishy-washy and woohoo, but I do think psychology is a big chunk of learning languages, or anything really for that matter. Yeah. It's how you frame it and how you think about it on a daily basis. But you still have to do the work. You can't think your way into acting a new way. You can act your way into thinking a new way, right?
Yeah. And
So
this is what it's really interesting, that thing about not being too hard on yourself, because there's always more to focus on. There's always more to learn, isn't there? But
always.
Celebrating those small successes, and even if it's just one word a day, and realizing that you've made that progress. I mean, you've got to take that as just as much as the other.
Exactly. Another thing that's really effective, I think, for long-term both measurement of progress and also keeping yourself motivated and realizing, oh, actually, I'm getting better, is recording yourself. Record yourself speaking, whether it's a Skype session you do with a tutor or an audio journal, or even just, it's not quite as powerful, but if you even just want to read something out that you've written, it won't be as natural. It won't be it won't be an assessment of your fluency, but it'll be an assessment of your reading ability. But yeah, an audio journal or a Skype session, record yourself at least once a month. And then when you are feeling bad, halfway through the month, you can go back and you can listen to the one from last month or a couple months ago.
Track your progress.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Actually, I sounded like rubbish back then, but now, I'm a lot better now. I used to not be able to pronounce, all the retroflexes in Mandarin. Now I can, and that's, I think, a really powerful tool.
Yeah, I was, because I've been recording some progress videos on my blog about my Cantonese journey, and every month I've tried to do it every month, recording just me talking a little bit as best I can, and it's a little bit of a chore to do it, because it's not the case that every month you get proportionally better. It's up and down.
Sure.
But
sure.
After 6 months, when I look back at the first one I did, I mean, it's just a world apart. And
right.
Yeah, and this psychology thing. I mean, I noticed this when I read your Master Japanese guide, and then similarly in your Master Mandarin, which is the sequel, that so much of the book you dedicate to the psychology and the way of thinking about the approach and the language. And I think, when I was looking at that, I thought this is you're really onto something here, because the reason that most people are going to give up is not because they haven't managed to learn this particular grammar point or whatever. It's because there's something going on in here or in here.
Right. Yeah. In the long run, I think that is the differentiator, is how you think about the language, how you think about your ability to learn the language. I think like with polyglots, for example, which I don't consider myself one. I mean, I've been involved in some projects with other polyglots, but I only speak 3 languages at this point, so that doesn't quite count. But if you look at, I think, a lot of the polyglots out there, I think really what makes the difference for them is the confidence they have. It's the confidence they have that no matter what the language, they can learn it. They know they can do it. And even though, it'll be a different, there'll be different challenges in each language group, especially, they know they can do it. They have the confidence. And I think that makes the difference.
Okay. So just to summarize what we've just spoken about then, the overwhelm thing, it's about breaking it down into the small bits.
Small
making
chunks.
Small, steady progress.
Yes.
And also looking back, not just looking forward at what you haven't done yet, but looking back over what you've achieved and trying to celebrate that and recognize what you've done.
And I want to add just one little thing in there as well, which is you do have to look forward, obviously. And I think that depending on your personality type, that too may motivate you. A lot of people, they get frustrated when I didn't know what that word was in that situation. And that frustration actually can also be a powerful motivator, depending on your personality type.
Okay. So that frustration can be either the thing that makes you give up or the thing that spurs you on to.
Yeah. It depends. I think, are you a type A type, or are you, or are you another kind?
Yeah,
so.
I know which type I am, but let's not go there. So listen, let's move on to the next point, which is another big question that comes up all the time. If I want to learn Chinese, do I need to go to China? What say you?
What say I? Well, I'm biased in that I did go to learn. I mean, most of my learning was in Taiwan. And I think there are a lot of obvious advantages to that. But I think people already know what those are for the most part. Maybe we can circle back if it's not obvious. But
Well, I mean, the
think Steve
advantages being that you've got the opportunities to speak to people, and you've got the input. You've got the opportunity to see things and read things and hear things on a daily basis.
24/7, you know. But there's two things I want to add to that. One is it's still not a guarantee. You can very easily insulate yourself in a little expat bubble and spend most of every day hearing, speaking, reading, and writing English, even though you're in China or Taiwan. So that's one drawback or potential drawback to that.
And in many ways, I mean, sorry to break in there, but in many ways that's the default, isn't it? Because I think most people that go and live in somewhere that's very different, like China, are not automatically going to go out all, you know, with loads of confidence and integrate into the local society. They're going to be at home and they're going to find expat friends and all that. So
more comfortable.
So it's not just that it's a risk. It's actually probably likely for most people.
That's a good point. I'm glad you said that, because that is the default, I think, for the vast majority of people. And there's nothing wrong with having some foreign friends to, you know, because you're going to have frustrations, you're going to have culture shock, and you need somebody you can vent to and, you know, get stuff off your chest. But you really have to be careful not to let that be the majority of your time. Or 5, 10, 20 years will go by and you'll think, oh, I really don't speak Chinese. You know, there's a lot of people like that, I think, especially, I think even more so in Japan.
Japan was quite shocking, actually, how many people seem to get by on hardly anything, on the name of their favorite brand of beer and their home station, and
or they get they have a Japanese significant other who speaks English, and then, you know, they do the heavy lifting for them. So
a similar thing in China.
Definitely a similar situation. I think it's seemed to be more so in Japan, but more of the foreigners I met in China and Taiwan at least made an effort. Right. It seemed, you know, they still spent most of their time in a foreigner bubble, but they at least, I think, made a little bit more effort. But anyway, back to the point is, it's not a guarantee that you will learn a language just because you live in the country. And then on the flip side of that, it's not impossible to learn a language in your home country. And I think that's a highly underappreciated advantage of all this new cool technology we've got. I mean, right now, you and I are speaking via Skype, you know, halfway around the world to each other. And you very well could be a Mandarin speaker. You know, and right now it's 9:24 in the morning here.
I wish I was. That would be great.
Wouldn't it? Yeah. So it's really just, I think, an excuse now to say, I can't learn because I don't live in China, I don't live in Taiwan, I don't have enough money to go abroad. You know, I think that's an excuse, not a reality.
Okay.
And that's what I'd say about half of my site and my guide and everything I focus on is providing specific recommendations of tools and resources that people can use. So no matter where you live, you can actually, flood yourself every day with listening input, reading input, and then chances to both speak and write the language with native speakers.
Okay, so I mean, do you think it's the case that pretty much every advantage or every benefit that you can get from living in China, you can replicate where you are?
Not everyone. I think you can make the best of wherever you live. I'll put it that way.
But you can replicate
enough that you can learn quite a bit. I still think it's obviously an advantage to go abroad, and that's less for the linguistic advantages. That's more for the cultural advantages. I mean, why are you learning the language in the first place? What's the whole point of it? It's probably to experience that culture, is to communicate with its people, it's to learn its history, it's to watch its movies, and so. And yes, there are chances to do that anywhere in the world, probably, but I think the full benefit and the full richness of speaking a language, I think, is fully realized when you do go abroad.
Yeah, and I guess for most people, it's perfectly possible to take a small, even if it's a short vacation to the place.
Sure.
You don't have to go and live there. You can visit, which is perfectly fine.
I think it's, in a lot of ways, it's ideal, because I think when you live in a place for a long time, as I lived in Taiwan, all said and done, I think 4.5, almost 5 years, and you start to take a lot of it for granted, I think. Yeah. Whereas if you're just visiting, specifically to enjoy it, I think you can get a lot more out of it in some ways.
Indeed. And I guess it's probably worth sort of breaking down the process as well, isn't it? Because, if you are at the beginning stages of learning a language, then, if you were a complete beginner and living in China, most likely you're going to have to do an awful lot of work before you can start speaking with native speakers on the ground a lot of the time. And it might take you, I don't know, it could easily take you a year or two or more before you can actually start, chatting to people casually. And that groundwork that you have to do at the beginning, I've found myself, I don't know what you think about it, but I think a lot of that groundwork of learning the initial vocabulary, getting used to the sound of the language, is something that, in a way, you could argue is better done back home, because you don't have the stress of thinking, oh God, I wish I could talk to that guy on the street corner, but I just can't. So by learning at home, you've got it's stress free. You can take your time.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And I've come across that myself, and I've heard a couple others, discover that same benefit. That was my experience in Japanese, for example. I mean, granted, when I got to Japan, it was still broken Japanese, but I was fairly familiar with a lot of vocabulary and basic sounds and everything in the language. So I could hit the ground running, and I could get a lot more immediate benefit from communicating, which then was this positive feedback loop, that made me want to learn even more and more and more. Whereas with Mandarin, I had a lot less to go on, and it was a lot more stressful and a lot more frustrating.
So did you have a period at the beginning of your time in China where you were kind of holed up doing some intensive studying? How did you manage it?
No, I still, I had to, had to eat. I had to, take taxis and, get to work and all those things. So I really didn't have a choice to use Mandarin on a daily basis. Or at least I didn't give myself the option.
Right.
But, I agree. I think had I had the chance to really get familiar with the language before going abroad, I think it would have been less stressful. But the counterpoint to all that is, stress isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can force you to learn a lot faster. So I think if speed is your primary goal, then even with zero groundwork or zero understanding, it's probably faster to go abroad from day one, or just jump in with 2 feet.
Yeah, in an ideal world, if you can choose what you do.
If you could just say, okay, this is how I'm going to learn this language. But few of us have that option. Of course, we get thrown into various adventures.
And so I guess the point really is, just as we were speaking about before, there are certain advantages and disadvantages to each particular context or method, but in no case is it an excuse not to get started or not to start doing a lot of work.
Yeah, and that's often, I think, what holds people back. We've already talked about the myth of Chinese being difficult, quote unquote. That holds people back. The myth of, I don't live in Taiwan or China, so I can't learn. That's bogus. I don't have enough money. I can't take classes. Well, that's also bogus now. There's so many chances online to learn for free, or at least very cheaply. So. Sure,
and I guess a lot of those resources you cover in your various guides.
As many as I can, and I constantly update it. Certain resources, the links get broken or they take them down, so I go through periodically and I update it and add more in. And I should mention that anyone who does buy the guide gets free updates for life. So anytime a new update is available, you can just go and get it downloaded.
Yeah, because this is something that I think is, when I haven't used the internet a great deal. I didn't used to use the internet a great deal for learning, but part of the reason that I didn't was because I really found it difficult to find. You've got to filter through so much junk before you actually get to the right thing. So having a resource of having it on a plate for you. Here are 20 different places you can go for quality information. It's a real goldmine, and it's what I really appreciated from your master Japanese.
Yeah, and that's really what I think the real value is there. It's time. Yes, you could go and find all this stuff on your own. You certainly can. And if you're a starving student, for example, and you have time but no money, then maybe it makes more sense for you to do that.
And if you're good at organising the bookmarks bar on your web browser.
Yeah, exactly. But if you're strapped for time, as most of us are, I think, it makes more sense to spend your time actually learning the language, not wasting all this time trying to find materials to learn the language.
Yeah, sure. So listen, I've got a question that I wanna ask from relating to going to China from Rick, and he wants to know how different is the Mandarin in mainland China from Taiwanese Mandarin, which is something I've heard that they're different, but I have no idea really. And he goes on, if I were to learn Mandarin in Taiwan, would I find it easy to converse in the mainland? The accents sound very different to me, almost like Cantonese and Mandarin.
Okay, excellent question. To the first point, they are distinct. I mean, you can hear, I think, a little bit of a difference. A lot of it depends on where in China and where in Taiwan you're talking about.
Really?
It's a bit comparing apples and oranges. I mean, outside of northern China, I mean, a lot of other places in China don't speak Mandarin very well. It's something that in recent years they started to learn it. But in my experience, I had no problem being understood in like Shanghai, for example. But as I traveled south down to like Xiamen, people had a lot different, accent. I actually had a harder time understanding people in southern China than I did in Taiwan. A lot of times.
Wow. Is that because does it get closer to Cantonese?
Probably, that would make sense.
Yeah, it's such a huge country, isn't it? It just
huge, and
expected.
Yeah, the word Chinese really is, I think, a bit of a misnomer. It's not one language. It is. I would even call them dialects. I think they are distinct languages that, for political reasons, have been put under one umbrella term of Chinese. But
I mean, it's quite common. I've heard a lot of people that go to Taiwan. It seems to be more. I mean, this might just be a misunderstanding from my part, but it seems to be a slightly more westernized or slightly more outward-looking part of China from a lot of the other areas. So, I mean, maybe
culturally, yes, yeah, I think so. And that's changing. I mean, in recent years, I think as China has started to open up more, I think that is changing. But culturally, yes, I think Taiwan is much more. Have to be careful the words we use, but
no, I think we've explained it perfectly well.
No, I think if you're a Westerner wanting to learn Mandarin, personally, I think Taiwan is a much more comfortable, enriching place to do it.
Okay, so but let's just go down on that a little bit in terms of the dialect. So as Rick says, if I were to learn Mandarin in Taiwan, would I find it easy to converse in the mainland? Let's say if you went to Shanghai or Beijing or...
Yeah, well, that was my experience. I mean, I did most of my Mandarin learning in Taiwan, but I did a lot of business in mainland China. So I had no problem communicating. I mean, really, the only challenge would probably be if you were going to Beijing. If you're going to go to Beijing, because they have all those, Beijing Hua, all the R stuff going on, that they add a lot of end of words, that's going to be very different. But that's going to be the case even if you're studying in Shanghai or other parts of China. If you go to Beijing, you're still going to have to learn that difference.
Can you say that again, that little bit?
Beijing Hua.
Nice. And that's Beijing dialect,
that's Beijing Hua, but they add an R sound on the end of a lot of things.
Okay, I've heard some people talking with that accent. Okay,
it's very pirate-like. It's cool.
Nice.
So I don't think so. I think if you learn in Taipei, I mean, I mentioned earlier I didn't get into it, but so in Taiwan, people in northern Taiwan, where Taipei is located, they speak quote unquote standard Mandarin. And there's some slight pronunciation differences between there and mainland China, but they're very mild. As you go south, though, more people are going to speak Taiwanese, which is actually a distinct language. It's related to the language of Fujian, China, which is where most of the people immigrated from to Taiwan. So that is an issue to consider. If you are going to learn Mandarin in Taiwan, probably it would make sense to do it in Taipei or in northern.
Okay. So again, it's one of these things: advantages, disadvantages, but no reason not to go and not to do it.
Yeah, and I think the quality of life, I think in Taiwan, far outweighs any linguistic disadvantages.
Yeah, and this is a big deal, isn't it? Because if anyone's actually going to go there to learn, I mean, just as you can find different aspects of language learning difficult, you've got to consider the place where you're living as well. If you're living in a place where you're miserable, the end effect is going to be that you give up learning the language. So it's a really big consideration. I mean, even probably shouldn't keep going back to Japan, but I mean, Japan's a prime example. People comparing people that live in Tokyo or Osaka, one of the big cities, to someone that gets posted out in the countryside somewhere, which is what happened to you.
Yeah.
I mean, again, disadvantages, advantages on both sides. It depends on what kind of person you are, but they can have a massive effect on your language learning, depending on your personality type.
Yeah. No, okay. I think, if you get, not that we usually get to choose per se, but there are a lot of advantages to being in a rural area for language learning, because that's
if you can
all you've got to do. If you can hack it, you can do it. I mean, it's not easy, and there'll be definite trials from the social point of view. But from a purely linguistic perspective, I think definitely it's an advantage.
Okay.
Anyway.